On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Avery. And Avery was married to a crazy-making abuser. It's a story of black and white thinking, lies, infidelity, triangulation, circular conversations, hoping for change, shame, and post-separation abuse. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Avery. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks.
Well, thank you for being here with us today. And before we start today's story, Avery's story, I get a lot of people asking me how the show got started. And the truth is I kind of stumbled upon it when a friend and I sat down and she started telling me about the abusive relationship that she went through. We hit the record button and put it out into the world. And then someone emailed me and said that it helped them. And from there, we started getting messages from others who had been through similar things and wanted to share their stories to help others too. This show has become a platform for survivor voices, and it's become a community. We help validate and learn and grow, and we also talk about things that society really isn't taking a look at, what they don't want to look at. And now this show needs your support as we navigate how to keep these things going and growing. And we're a community now, and we want to make sure that these stories keep getting out there and that the safe support network that includes our online support group can keep running and growing. And to make sure of this, ads are a big part of this world. And we just really want to make sure that the ads that we have line up with the needs and interests of you, our community of listeners and to survivors. So if you love the show and want to support what it does, you can do so by filling out this survey now that is in our show notes. And you can share it with anyone who you think should take it too. And once again, the link for this survey is in our show notes. And I thank you in advance for doing so. And now, after saying all of that, I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Thank you, Avery, for being here. The floor is now yours.
I was born to two teenage people, teenage parents. My mom was 16 when she found out she was pregnant, and my father had taken off to enlist in the Navy by the time she realized she was pregnant. So they had a shotgun wedding about 6 months before I was born. And we lived, they were both from California. We moved to Charleston, South Carolina to live near the base. My parents were married for, I think they divorced when I was 3. And my dad was an alcoholic and not very reliable. My mom was really young and pretty much on her own in a trailer park just outside of Charleston. We moved back to California, I think when I was just over a year old, lived with some family for a little while. And then after the divorce, my mom was completely on her own. She ended up remarrying right before I turned 5. So they were married for, I think, 30 years. So I have 2 siblings. I was a child of divorce, but I had a nuclear family as well. So it was kind of a mix that way. My biological father was not in the picture. He was a little bit when I was very little. My mother told me much later, she let me, form my own opinions of my father. And then as an adult, we had some conversations, but there was a lot of saying he would be there and not showing up, that sort of thing, which I saw play out, in my sort of tween and early teen years. I think the last time I actually visited with him was when I was about 11. And then at 19, he reached out to see me. And then when I got there, it turns out it was step 9 of AA. So it was, just to make amends. And then he never reached out again after that. So he's been out of the picture. I did have, a father in my life, but still had that sort of, in and out, absent father. My mother, when she was 50, she had what we called her first mental break. So we didn't really realize my mom had a mental illness. She had a really epic set of manic episodes at 50 and 51. But looking back, I can definitely see that she was, sort of low cycling, bipolar. And as a 3-year-old, I could get up and make my own breakfast and do that stuff. And for many years, the lore was that was, I was so independent and I was, really able to take care of myself. And then looking back through this process of healing from abuse, it's really become clear that there probably was some, level of neglect, that my mom was young and, divorced and couldn't pay all of her bills, on a full-time job, and probably was cycling into depressions and all of that. My therapist, maybe a year out of the abusive relationship that's most recent, she said, that is probably part of why I normalized certain behaviors, right? I knew they weren't really okay, but it was still sort of something people who love you or you love sometimes do.
So let's say high school version of you. Who are you? What do you like? Just paint us a picture of, I guess, your life, maybe your view on relationships and how you viewed yourself in the world, and if there were any kind of issues that you would notice at this time. But as far as who you are as a whole at this time, just paint us a picture.
High school. High school is actually when I stopped trying to make my parents happy, which caused a lot of friction, a lot. My 8th grade school picture, I was just thinking about this, is the last one my mother put up in the house because I was wearing sort of trendy clothes and had cute little earrings and cute hair and all of that. And then for 9th grade, which was when high school started for me, I started wearing all black and just decided to, not try to fit that role, and started hanging out with, what I guess today would be called sort of goth or emo. All my friends were either punk or metalheads. Like, it was just sort of the misfit crew. The rest of the school called us the burnouts. It was back in the day when schools had smoking sections. And so I didn't smoke, but all my friends did. So I don't know that anybody in high school would believe me that I didn't. So I was kind of angry and sad, and I had always been ahead in school. Like, teachers would give me, I was in like a school they opened for, what they used to call gifted and talented education. And teachers would give me extra work so I wouldn't, get bored in class when I would finish something. High school, I just really decided I didn't want to work hard. So I just took normal, the regular classes, and started ditching school and drinking. I dabbled a little bit in drugs. I had friends who went really hardcore that way. But I sobered up at like 15 because my mom really got on me and made friends with the attendance office and made it really impossible for me to keep it up. And then I just sort of skated with my friends, skated by. I decided I was going to do community college because I didn't have to work very hard and I didn't have to take AP classes, and I didn't do any of that. Got a job at 16 and worked retail, 30 hours a week on top of school because I could then have, even more independence and have a car and do all of that. I didn't date a lot in high school. In my freshman year, I dated a senior. No, I'm sorry. I dated him in my sophomore year, so he was out of high school. And then I realized he was in a gang very oddly as he made me duck in a car as we were driving around. I lived in an area of town that had a high gang activity. And so, I ended that with him. And then I don't think I had a boyfriend again till my senior year. Like I just was more focused on my friends and sometimes getting drunk, at a really young age. So, yeah.
So what were your 20s like?
My 20s, when I started community college, I got really focused and I still, goofed around with friends, but I really buckled down and transferred. I grew up in the Central Valley in California in a rural town, and I didn't like the climate socially, the weather, any of it. I didn't like any of it. And so I transferred out of there after 2 years to San Francisco State. And I realized after I got kicked out of the California State University system because I enrolled for 3 semesters and quit going 3 semesters in a row without dropping or anything, that I'd really buckled down because I wanted out. And I got out, and then I didn't have that same motivation then to the first 2 weeks of a class at college could be exciting because it's like a fresh start and maybe a topic you're interested in by that point, but I didn't really want to do that. So I was just working for a while. I moved back home to go back to school and finish a couple years later and ended up getting into deciding to stay longer to do an MFA in writing. And so at that point, I really felt like I'd kind of found, a purpose. Like I didn't know if I was going to make a career out of it. That wasn't really the goal, but it was just this world where I suddenly felt like I fit, I wanted to be. I met a woman in college while I was still finishing my bachelor's and fell madly in love with her. We were together for 13 years. I lost my family over that. So, my parents were not okay with that. And once I drew a line that, we either had to both be invited to family events or, we were just going to make our own tradition. So I think at 23, I was pretty much on my own in a graduate program with her, and we were living together. And that was the bulk of my 20s, was working on that degree and then getting the hell out of town again to move to Portland, Oregon. So we moved to Portland. We were there as a couple almost 10 years. It was a good relationship. It, had its ups and downs. And of course it didn't, go longer than it did, but it was an anchor later when I got into the abusive relationship because I knew what a respectful relationship should be like. I knew I could do that. So to a certain degree, I had a little bit of Teflon as far as, things always being my fault because I knew that I'd grown up a lot in that relationship. Towards the end of my years in Portland is when my mom's mental health became a really big issue in the family. And so when we ended the relationship, my original plan was to stay in Oregon. And then I decided I needed to move back to California to be closer to family. I had a sister who'd been in and out of rehab, and then my mom was sort of in and out of mental health holds and had actually gone to jail for a little while. So I moved back to California, and having just ended that relationship that had been, from my early 20s to my mid 30s, like I really was trying to figure out who I was all by myself, because that relationship had been so central to everything. Who I was in the context of this family. Like my family had come back into my life after about 5 years of not talking to me. And so I can look back in hindsight and see that I really forgave a lot of how they operate or how they may have treated me, because I just really wanted my family to be back. I just really wanted to have everything, that sort of happy ending, right? Of like them coming around, everything being okay. But when I moved back to California, there was a lot of chaos right before I moved back. My mother had taken over the family home and had kicked my father out maybe a couple years before. She had started renting rooms out and had like squatters. She had it was a really beautiful older home on like a quarter acre. And she had people there that like the police department wouldn't send one officer in to go see. Like, I mean, some pretty dangerous like folks were there. And we'd lost contact with her, but there had been a murder in the house. And so that the aftermath of that, my mom, we didn't know at the time, but we figured out she had moved out before that happened, because I think it got out of her control, the sort of situation of squatters and people living there had put like these like 3 locks on a bedroom door, because I think whoever else was living there was pretty sketchy. So when I moved back, that had all just happened. We knew my mom was okay, but we didn't really know where she was at. My sister and I got taxed because she was newly out of rehab and I had just relocated and didn't yet have a job, with cleaning up the house, which was to this day, it stands as one of the most like difficult couple weeks of my life. It was, lots of disgusting stuff left all over the house on top of, fingerprint, dust everywhere to clean up. And we were trying to salvage family memories that were like literally like thrown around or tucked in like weird crawl spaces of the closets. I was also trying to maintain a long distance relationship with someone I had started dating after the long-term relationship broke up. And he was, looking back, I think if I hadn't had distance, I may not have seen it as clearly, but he was really controlling. And I would have these days in this house and I would be like exhausted in every sense you can be exhausted. I was just like beat. And I would get back to, I was staying at my sister's house and I would take a shower and try to wash all the like disgust off from the mess of that house. And, we would either talk on the phone or he would want to chat on the computer. And he would say things like, I didn't sound excited enough to speak to him. And like, I should, have more excitement in my voice. And it's like, really? Like, I think, maybe because we had, hundreds of miles between us, I could clearly see that as like, exactly what I'm doing. You know exactly what the weight of all of this is emotionally. And like, I'm talking to you. Like that should be enough, right? At this point, I'm using what little energy I have to do that. So I ended that. And it was interesting because he drove down from Oregon, like, and sort of held me hostage in my car at one point, saying he was just going to turn around and leave if I didn't say we could still be together, and, odd things like that. And I didn't say that. And then he stayed. And then when he left, it was like, yeah, we're still not together. But, so after all of that, I decided I wasn't going to date at all. Said clearly there's a lot of like chaos that's been happening and I need to make sure that I'm healed. So I actually didn't date anybody for almost a year. And I did a lot of writing. I took some time off around New Year's of 2011 or it was going to be 2012. And I made paper boats out of origami paper and did this ritual where I wrote on them like all the things I needed to let go that had to do with, my mom or relationships or things like that. And I went on New Year's Day and released them to the, out into the ocean, went to the beach and then met up with some friends. And, I was really intentional about trying to make sure that before I got into another relationship that I was in a good headspace. I was clear. I was, healed from mourning, sort of all these things that had just come up, in the last 5 years of my life. And then once I decided I was ready to date, then the abuser showed up.
So walk us through the meeting of where you met this person and how they, became a big part of your life.
So I was, relatively new back to the state. I had made, most of my friends were not in the immediate area, but I had made a couple new friends through some longtime friends. And so as became a pattern, I sort of gave trust to those new acquaintances because they were attached to people I trusted. And those two women dragged me out to go see a punk band play. One of the women, she was the one I was hanging out with the most. We drove over there mostly because we needed to give another friend of hers a ride home from the show. But she kept going, just come with me, just come with me, just come with me. And this friend was sober. So, when we went, I didn't drink. We both were just drinking water, watching. Supposedly there was the woman we were going to give a ride home to, some woman was going to show up there and was threatening to beat her up. And I remember just being I am way too old for this. Why am I still here making jokes about how I'm going to, have a rubber band on my wrist to pull my hair back if things get weird. But I had been in the, I had attended a lot of events and been sort of, auxiliary to the punk scene back home when I was much younger. And so it kind of felt fun at the time to be back in that world. And I love music. And so, seeing small shows and seeing bands play and that energy, it was fun. We were there, and it turns out the person who had given her a ride, the woman we were supposed to pick up and give a ride home, was him. So he had given her a ride there, but she wanted us to give her a ride home. So I got introduced by these two new friends to him. And he asked one of them, who's your hot friend? Introduce me. He was just really over the top, pursuing, he came and stood by me while one of the bands was playing and I don't even remember what he was saying, but I remember making shoveling motions and flipping, pretending to flip the shovel over my shoulder, and rolling my eyes and being you're okay. Those are some good lines, whatever. But, he was entertaining me, but I wasn't into him at all. And then we were going to drive back to the town we lived in and then go get a beer where we could just have a beer and walk home. And he was going to meet us there. And he didn't show up. And I remember I was actually relieved because then it was just the three, us three friends hanging out. But he did friend request me probably before he passed out that night on Facebook. And then the next day was messaging about hanging out or about going out. And I told him, I said, if you want to hang out as friends, that's fine, but I'm not interested in dating right now, which wasn't really the truth. But I just, I was just I don't know that I even like you or anything, but maybe, you're making me laugh a little bit. And it's interesting because that night I actually had a bunch of girlfriends, even coming from out of town. And we were doing this party we'd been planning for a long time. And he kept saying he was going to show up when we were at this bar across the street. And I was like, no, you're not. No, this is my girlfriend's. I'm not going to be that woman. No way. No. But it was interesting because I kind of glossed over that, he invited me to a family baby shower that night and then was saying he was going to crash, my party. And in hindsight, I'm that's creepy. Why, why did I think it was funny? But, I had I was putting up boundaries, and he would respect those, it seemed. And he had his son 50% of the time, so he was going to have him the whole next week. So we weren't going to hang out because he was going to have his son. And in that week, he was constantly texting me. And he was funny. He was witty. I was looking forward to the text. It was, because it was really making me laugh. And it was kind of fun, after so long of intentionally just withdrawing from the dating world, to have somebody that interested was really, it felt good. And so my Achilles heel has always been, if somebody can make me laugh, then they become far more attractive than they did, before I knew they could make me laugh. So I often wonder if we had actually just hung out in person sooner, if I would have been hooked as fast, because I think that sort of communication really suited love bombing, and, that you can just really, he could be doing whatever, but saying constantly all these, funny, nice things. So then we hung out, I think 3 times the week after that, had a first date, and then ended up hanging out a couple nights before that to meet back in person because then we were both free. And I had said, to my friends, I said, I don't even know if I would want to kiss him. He's making me laugh, but I don't even remember what he looks like at this point. I don't even remember. I don't know him that much. I don't even know if I would be attracted. And then, by the first time we hung out again, I was like, yeah, I think I do. I think I like him. But he pursued, really hardcore. And at the time, it didn't feel like things moved that fast. But of course, when I look back, I'm like, of course they moved really fast, because we met in mid-February. And by the end of April, I told him I loved him. He really was at first he really came off very, when it came to the romantic relationship part, very shy, very timid, very definitely saying what he wanted, that he wanted to go out, that he wanted to be with me, but also played this real, I've been hurt. And, he had a tattoo, actually. I mean, I'm sure he still does, across his chest that said "Love hurts," or "Love lies." I'm sorry, "Love lies," that he got after his first girlfriend broke his heart, supposedly. So, at that point, I think that he definitely seemed like someone who was straightforward, someone who wasn't afraid to have feelings for someone. He also seemed like someone who needed love. And I think that I've always sort of had this maternal side to me. I have siblings who are quite a bit younger that I helped care for a lot, and then was always, babysitting and doing things like that. And I think there was this caretaking element, right, of, here's this guy with this broken heart who's, been married and divorced and wishes he could be with his kid more, and just really wants to, find love and settle down. And he really is that serial, quote unquote, monogamist, an abuser, where he's jumping into long-term relationships right after each one. So I just, we had fun. It felt easy compared to the things that had gone on between my previous long-term relationship and then meeting him. He was really, really agreeable. And of course, from his perspective, we were soulmates, and nobody had ever made him feel this way. And, he would thank me all the time for letting him be himself. And, and of course he was interested in all the things I was interested in. And, I had no idea at that point how many cues, you would give off that somebody who's predatory is going to, be really attuned to. So it seemed like we were just both, wanting the same things. And then we, half the time he was just a solo person and I didn't have any kids. And so it was, we could just go out and eat or go out to a show, or we could just take off, to Santa Cruz for the weekend, or we could just, it was just this fun. It felt really secure to me at first.
So eventually triangulations start to happen, a big one with the woman he dated previously to you and then his ex-wife. So walk us through this.
When we were out to dinner and he was telling me that, this one woman that he had dated, but he had ended it a month before we met, and she was just kind of crazy and psycho and wouldn't let go and kept texting him. And, so if I see any messages from her, that's what that is. But, she knows about me and he's not interested. And I remember just going, why don't you change your phone number then? Like, if somebody won't leave you alone, just like block her or change it. And he goes, oh no, I've had this phone number forever. And, and it's true he has, because, it's how he keeps connected to everybody in that way. And then of course he was setting all of the stones in place to triangulate his ex-wife and I. He was acting like, she had cheated on him and that she really broke his heart, and she really fought him about seeing his son, and he had to fight really hard for that. And that, she was really difficult and she wouldn't include him in things, and, really set all that up. And then, eventually I saw messages that he sent to her about me that even in the beginning were really interesting, because it was just kind of like, nitpicking at certain things, or just kind of like, he sort of set me up with her he set me up as like the fall guy for anything that was going to happen in our house, that had to do with his son. And looking back in hindsight, I met his son faster than I would introduce my daughter to anybody. But the only reason I think it wasn't right away was because of me. And because I made it clear that I would, I think I said things like, oh, I know, I won't meet him right away because we haven't known each other very long, but when I do, or, so he kind of tried to play that, like it was his decision, which, knowing from his ex-wife now, that's not how any of the relationships before went. I mean, he was bringing women around his son all the time. But he was setting all of those triangulation stepping stones in place at that time. But in the case even of the woman he had been dating, who was crazy and psycho and wouldn't let go, like, he just really played it as like, woe is me. Like, I'm trying to, separate from this. But one of our first big fights was in May. So we had just really, we'd only been together, seeing each other for 3 months. We went to a show that his band was playing, and that crazy psycho woman, quote unquote, she showed up with her friends. And I was really uncomfortable because I was like, I don't think he knows that I know what she looks like, right? But I did, because of course, with all of that weirdness he was sort of doing in the beginning, I had like looked through some of his Facebook. Just in my mind, I was just sort of getting the landscape, right? Like seeing, so I would know if I ran into anybody. We live in a pretty small community. And she showed up and I was like super uncomfortable. And then when I was waiting outside for him, when the show was over and it was time to walk home, he wasn't coming out. And I finally went in, and he was at the bar talking to her and her friends. And I was livid. I was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you've said this woman is crazy. Like, why are you even encouraging this? Right. But I just walked out, and then I walked home, and he told me, oh, I was just thanking her for behaving. I was like, what? Like, I remember I think we sat outside my apartment. Like, I didn't even let him in. And we just argued for like an hour and a half over that. And it was one of the first times I can look back and see that, you know, he would outwardly be apologizing that hurt me, but he also was just flipping it around, that it was my fault. And so during that time is when I decided I was going to go to therapy, because I was worried that my own issues were going to sink this relationship. And I wasn't even consciously getting yet that he was really subtly pointing me in that direction, that he would flip, you know, every single issue around, so that it was like, well, I don't know why you're so paranoid about this, or I don't know why you can't see that this isn't, you know, maybe it's because of your past, or maybe it's because of all this stuff with your mom, or maybe it's, you know, all of those things. He would seem really concerned about that. And I said, okay, well, then I'm going to go to therapy, because I'm going to make sure that, like, this isn't my stuff that's going to, you know, derail us. And then I did that. And the therapist, one of the first things she told me was that I was displaying hypervigilance. And that made complete sense to me, because, you know, I think a lot of us who might use the word empath, or say that we're really like sensitive or receptive, right? That, you know, we have our antenna like super tuned. So for whatever reason, right, whether it was as a child, you know, my mother's moods were just so gently shifting that I was, you know, tuning in for when that would change, or, you know, all the sort of trauma of what had happened in my family, or any of that. And so I told him that. And it was one of the first times where I can look back and see something completely weaponized, because to me, I came in and I'm like, hey, I have this word for what's happening. And from my perspective, it wasn't even that I was seeing things that weren't real. It was sort of validation that I'm just really attuned. And so I'm noticing a lot of things. And that's what I kept telling him. I'd be like, no, what I'm seeing is a thing. Like, if you're doing this, but you're saying she's crazy and you don't want her to contact you, but then you're encouraging her, then that's a problem. Like that those things don't match. Those two things don't go together. Or, you know, there was an episode where he threw something as a pumice stone. It's one of the funniest things. And he still tells people this story is why I'm crazy. I had a broken pumice stone. The handle was broken off of it in the bathtub, and I was going to just fix it. I like to not throw things away if they can just be fixed. And I went in the bath and it was gone. And I was like, what did I do with that? Like, I worried that I had lost it. I didn't know where it could have gone, because why would I take it out of the bathtub? And when I got out of the bath and I threw something away in the garbage, I saw the handle of it peeking out. So he had thrown it away, but covered it up in the garbage. And to me, that was the weird part, that he didn't say anything. And then he like hid it in the garbage can. So I was asking him about it, and he was like, what is wrong with you? It was garbage. I'm like, well, that's fine. I mean, I was going to fix it, and I could throw it away. I can buy another one, but I don't know why you hid it, or why you didn't ask me if I still wanted it. And that became like a weeks long, like, fight. But it was those things where I was like, no, I'm hypervigilant, but what I see is still there. Like, that's what I kept trying to come to him as. And he would turn around and go, you're just, you know, you need to stop being so hypervigilant and seeing things that aren't there. And so we would sort of go in a circular argument about that. And in hindsight, now that I know that it's, you know, kind of a common thing to hide things and make someone feel like they're kind of losing their mind, I'm like, oh, that makes even more sense now. Like, you just, you know, you were just messing with me, like, just to have me be confused. You didn't count on me finding it in the garbage can, though. And that's where, you know, because towards the end, I lost my keys a lot. And I think in the 4 years that since I ended the relationship with him, I've lost my keys once. It's that stuff where I'm like, oh, that's what you were doing. But I kept going to therapy, and I looking back, I definitely, all the things that were problematic, I would do, that sort of positive projection, right? Like, he just doesn't understand. Like, he never got taught how to do this, or, like he got bounced around a lot as a kid. He got shoved off on a lot of people. His parents weren't always around. And I was like, you just need to learn that this matters, or you need to, understand. And he would, especially in the first year to 2 years, he was really amenable. Like, when we would have conversations about things that bothered me, he would be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I won't do that anymore. It would seem like a very mature, grown up conversation. It turns out he never stopped doing anything that hurt me. He just tried to hide it better. But, for the most part, I just really was positively projecting. There was an episode, wasn't long after him talking to the crazy woman at the bar, where we went to a show his band was going to play in a city in the, a little north of us. And supposedly there was some beef happening that had already happened with like some out of town band had, like, their friends had beat up some friend of his really bad. And so he thought there might be a fight there. And I was like, I don't want to go if there's going to be a fight. And none of his friends were coming, and he was acting like they were all leaving him alone to deal with this. But before his band was going to play, there was this weird moment where I could tell he was getting really tense. And then something happened with they got bumped to later in the show. And this band that he was so mad at got their spot because they had to, like, drive home out of town. I don't know, something. And I didn't know it, but he had disappeared out to his car, and he came back in with a bat. And he went up and he just started swinging at the band on the stage. And I was back in a room where all the band equipment was. There was only one way out, one way in. But one of his friends who was in the band, he was at the doorway, and I was back sitting on a couch, and he just said, your man's about to, like, do something. You should come out here. But by the time I got out there, he was swinging this bat. I mean, at the people on the stage, at the equipment. The whole crowd turned against him, and they were all trying to get him to stop and get him out of the venue. And he was like, the sort of the sort of story where you can lift a car with your adrenaline. Like, he was just dragging like 50 people around in a circle, like, as they're just trying to get him to the door. And one of his friends jumped in and was trying to get him out the door. And at one point, he's bringing the whole crowd towards that room. And I am just like, I don't know what to, like, I'm looking and I'm like, there's like drum cymbals here, but there's nothing I can protect myself with if this like mass comes in here. And I looked at him, and his eyes were just black. Like, he just had those like black eyes. And I, when I would look back after we split up, that was one of those moments where I was like, I was terrified. I was, full alarm. And then once it got smoothed over, I just like repressed it, because thinking of those black eyes was just like it didn't go with what I knew of him all the other moments we'd been together. And so, I saw those black eyes a lot after I ended it. And that's when I was like, oh. But I remember after that show, like, a friend got him out to the car, and another friend was like, dude, you have a kid. You can't be doing this. Like, you can't go to jail. And he was just still like kind of out of it. And then this other friend drove us home, and he had cuts all over his head, and he was kind of a mess. And we were supposed to go out of town the next morning to the beach. And the next morning I just told him, I said, if that's the life you want, then go ahead. Like, go have it. But I don't want any part of that life. Like, that is not, like, there's nothing about what you did that I think is like funny or cute or none of it. Like, I don't care what those guys did. Like, what you did was wrong. Like, that was, you put a lot of people in jeopardy. Like, a lot of people could have been hurt. And, you're just saying it's because it was disrespectful. Like, I was like, I don't like this. But he promised me that wasn't the life he wanted, and he wasn't going to do any of that again. And he really did actually, stay away from a lot of shows. But, in his circle, they were like, for years, people were like high-fiving him. Like, it was just this story of like, this kind of epic event or something. And I remember once being with a couple of his male friends sitting at a table at a bar while there was like a street fair happening in our town. And these like beer girls came up and were flirting with the guys. But at the same time, the guys were talking about that night, and they were talking about it in this really positive, like, that was really cool way, or like, you're such a legend, or like something, right? And I got really upset and left. And later I was laughing because I'm like, oh man, those guys probably think I got mad, like, because the beer girls were there. But really it was like, no, it was this other thing. Like, why? Like, you guys are all acting like this thing where he just became this, violent demon. It was just like so checked out of any version of him I had known. And so that, early on, that was one of the things that I was like, I almost bailed. There were, moments like that. There were a few in the first 6 months where I would back off and say I needed space. And then he would just pursue hardcore. He would just, I don't want to lose this. Like, we're meant to be together. This is the best thing I've ever had. I promise I'll change.
So eventually you end up really shifting your life for this person, moving in, you do get pregnant, and little things start to pile up, and they start to pile up. So walk us through this.
So, he and his son ended up moving in with me at basically the 1 year mark after we met. And, it was still like a really fun, happy time for the most part. I can look back and see that I was, being gaslit about certain things or spun around. But for the most part, he was really agreeable. He was definitely still playing the role of, the person who was right for me. And then when his son moved in, I love kids, and he was at an age that's one of my favorite. His son was 6. He was adorable. And so I really took on, making the weekends fun and making a room for him and doing all of that stuff. And then it really was by the end of that year, like at the time, it didn't seem like we had only been together that long, but by close to the 2 year mark, I had started, wondering. I had decided in my early 20s that I wasn't going to have children, partly because a close friend's brother had committed suicide, and seeing her parents go through that had made me think, yeah, I don't want to risk it. If that, I don't want to love something that much and then feel that much pain. And, he had one child. He said he'd always wanted a lot of children. And I remember talking to my friends about, now that I'm out of this long-term relationship where we had both agreed we weren't going to have kids, like now it's just sort of a decision about what do I want. And so I talked to him about it and said, I'm willing to try, like if you want to, but it would have to be pretty soon because I was turning 40 or had just turned 40. And I didn't really want to do any interventions. I just was like, if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And so he said, yeah, he would like that. And we ended up getting pregnant really fast, like within a couple months. And then I had a miscarriage early, and then we tried again. I said, I'll try one more time, but I'm not going to, if we miscarry again, I'm not going to risk a third. And so, just over 2 years after we got together, I was pregnant with our daughter. And during that time, about 4 or 5 months into the pregnancy is when I really started to see that something was not okay, that something was wrong, and that the way that I felt was shifting, and that these little things were all piling up. And whenever I would bring something up, it was just the height of those circular word salad conversations where it's suddenly he's trying to tell me it's my fault. And, having been in a healthy relationship, I was like, no, this isn't how this goes. Like, how did we even get here? And by the end of the conversation, I would just be like crying on the floor going, I don't know what were we talking about to begin with? Like, I was just so spun around. And it's the first time I started to really sort of see contempt. Him, like he had contempt for me when any of these things would come up, or if I would hold him accountable for anything, like where he really was just starting to flip. And, he was less affectionate, less positive about us. I remember we were commuting to work together because then he'd managed to get a job at my work, and he, I don't even know what we were fighting about, but I kicked him out of the car, like near the bridge in our town, and said, go get your car. Like, I'm done with you. Like, I can't talk to you right now. And those are the things where he'd be like, you're so crazy. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, normal people don't do that. But it was one of the first times I remember being physically there's a way that my body would just sort of recoil from his energy sometimes. And so I'd have to be further away. By the last trimester, I remember being in my room and just like literally crying out loud saying, like, what am I bringing a child into? Like, what is this? I don't understand this. Like, because it would be, I'm the best ever. And then it would be like, I'm the worst ever. Like, I was like, this back and forth is just so disorienting. I don't know what to do with this. And so I actually told him we needed to go to therapy. And so my therapist agreed to see us together. And we did that for a couple months before I gave birth. But not knowing what we were in, and then just, the therapist just kind of trying to help us with the situation. It was stuff like, well, maybe can he be the fun parent and you're the rule parent, or, it's this stuff. And I'm like, sure, but I don't know. Like, I was starting to realize that the way he'd represented his expenses in relation to his son weren't true. I'd been covering all the bills except for splitting rent with him. He was also at that point allowing me to I was buying all the groceries. I was buying, all of this stuff where I was like, wait a minute, like, I wanted my own account because I don't want to give up, my own independence, but this is bullshit. Why am I paying for all this as our expenses are like climbing? But when my daughter was born, I was just in this like euphoric cloud after that. I was so in love with her. I was so in love with this family that we were, that I was creating, holding on to, like, him, his son, her, me. I sort of had like the opposite of any sort of postpartum. Like, it was hard and I was tired, but I also was just in this like happy cloud of like, look what we made. Like, look at how amazing this is. And then a couple months after she was born, he proposed and I said, yes. But I think over the next probably only like 8 months, after a couple months, I think I wore the ring solid for 2 or 3 months. And then everything started to just be worse than it was when I was pregnant. Like, his level of contempt for me was climbing. I was getting so annoyed with him because I was doing everything for our daughter. I was buying everything. I was the one getting up. And, I was breastfeeding, so he would, put it off on that. But I'm like, you literally could give her a bath when you get home from work, but you just sit on your phone, or you just, do all these other things. So I gave him back the ring 3 times. And I think twice I threw it at him and said, when you can convince me that you actually want to get married, then why don't you give it back? Because I love you and I want to marry you, but this doesn't feel like this is actually what you want. And then he would turn around and, be mad at me and say how disrespectful and rude it was that he spent all that money on that ring and loved me, and I'm throwing it at him, or, how do I think that feels? And so he had the ring. And then I think that was about the time that I just really felt like something was so wrong. One night I just asked him for his phone, and I found all these texts between him and his ex-wife bad-mouthing me. And then I met with his ex-wife to be like, I see this. Like, I was mad at him and having conversations with him about how inappropriate, but then I met with her and set, what to me felt like I was just setting boundaries, but can look back and see I was just trying to have some kind of control over my life, because I wasn't going to just walk away, because now we had a child. And I didn't want to just dismantle her family if there was any hope of fixing it. I eventually, like 3 or 4 months after that, found emails where he basically had been having what I think was an emotional affair. I don't think it was very physical, with his very first girlfriend. So they had been having an affair. They'd been having an affair on and off for like 20 years at that point. She was married and had kids. He had been married while he was doing that, and then, was with me. I reached out to her because I knew I wasn't going to get the truth from him. And I made her call me, and I sort of tricked her into, confirming or denying certain things, which is why I think it wasn't physical. But at that point, the world, like, the way that it felt was like a sinkhole had opened up beneath me. Like, I felt like everything from my life had just collapsed on top of me, and I was in this deep hole, and I didn't know how I was going to dig out of it, because I had this child. I loved his son, but I didn't know what to make of. I was like, everything is a lie. I had found an iPad that he had hidden, which is actually how I found out about the affair with the other woman. But he bought it from another woman he'd always tried to date, and like went and picked it up from her so he could give her a hug. Like, he would do those, like be like that little puppy dog teddy bear, like, oh, I just need a Rita hug. Like, he had a guitar he'd bought and he hadn't told me. Like, meanwhile, I'm paying for all the bills and complaining to him that, I need some help. And he's acting like he has all these expenses for his son. And it, I was able to figure out he'd never paid child support. He'd made it part of his divorce agreement that he never had to pay child support. There were, after the affair, like a month after that, I found in his like photo library, he'd been collecting photos of like women that were friends or friends' wives or girlfriends, and saving like photos off their social media profiles. And it was like, at that point, it was like, this is like creepy. It's just like serial killer archives. I don't know, like, why do you have these? And he wouldn't be able to tell me. We had started, after I found out about the affair, I told him if I was going to stay even one more day, that we were going to go to therapy, and that, we were going to find somebody new, and that he was going to quit. He was going to quit the bands for right now. We were both going to quit social media. We were going to go completely sober so that nothing was a distraction. That the main focus had to be saving this family, or it was just done. And he would always at the 11th hour come around to these things and say, okay, you're the world to me. This family's the world to me. That therapist, he gave us a test, our first or second session, that was based on the Gottman institute stuff. And I hadn't learned about Gottman before this. And then, since I've looked back at it and thought, wow, I should have just walked out right then. Because when we did this test, the therapist said, you guys have all 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. But what I heard then was like, but we can fix that, right? There's hope, right? Like there's hope. And now I'm like, wow, I should have just packed my bag and cut my losses right that second. That was I think we started therapy in July or August. And then the very next year in September, we split up. And it was just a crazy making year because he didn't mask really anymore just how angry he would get at me. It was that very under the surface contempt, but he would say I could never be happy and I was just wallowing in my pain, and I was giving him sections from books about how to help your partner through like betrayal triggers and like all this stuff. And then he would say, well, you're just bringing this on yourself and you just can't get over it. And I'd be like, but if you would just help me when I get triggered, I can't help it. But you could do stuff that would make this heal way faster. And he would just refuse. Like, he was like, this is you. Like, this isn't me. I said, I'm sorry and I won't do it again. And, so it was, it was a lot of that, a lot of crying into bath towels in the bathroom or in the laundry room, after my daughter went to bed. That year felt like just this like daytime trudge of sort of getting through like all the tasks. And then once she would go to bed, just falling apart because it was the first time I could do it. And then him being mad at me and maybe sleeping downstairs for 4 days because I can't just let it go. And I keep taking it out on him by crying, by being hurt, by him still lying about certain little things. And then, of course, being triggered by that, by driving by a place that they, met up secretly at or something like that. So I thought it was over. I actually met with a lawyer and I met with a paralegal and was looking at what the best way to do it. Because I did know, one of the things I did know from having done a deep dive in his computer and everything was that he was a real jerk to his ex-wife when they split up. And so part of me was very afraid of what was going to happen. So I knew I needed something official for custody. Like, I wasn't going to play around. So we even met about, what we thought that would be. And then within 3 or 4 weeks, we were back together. Like, I was still very trauma bonded. I felt so crushed and like just bone deep sad every time, if he was living, we have sort of a duplex. So he was living in one of the units until he could find somewhere. And every time he would like take both kids off for his time, like, I was just broken. I was just like, I can't believe, this is what life is. So I was, I fell prey to sort of his like passive aggressive hoovers of like, I wish we could make this work, or I miss you. And so we ended up back together for 2 more years. And sometimes it felt okay, but mostly it was just that cycle of me being incredibly hypervigilant for signs that he wasn't telling the truth, and him getting really angry at me for having any sort of feelings or expectations of him. So, I would always put our daughter to bed, and then I'd go in the bedroom and he'd be just on his phone or watching football or something. And then I'd be like, it'd be nice if you would help. Like, you could have made her lunch for tomorrow while I was putting her to sleep. And he'd be like, oh, well, nothing is ever enough. Like, I can't, I worked all day too. And, I was working, I was back to work at that point. And I'm like, you don't do anything. Like, I think in 3 years, he made her lunch one time, and then he gave her a bath one time, but he didn't do it right. So I had to put her back in the bathtub and like rinse her hair. Which I think is that kind of, weaponized incompetence, right? Like, I think he would do things not quite right, because then it would just be easier for me to do them than have him do them wrong, and then have a fight, and then have days of silent treatment, and, be so upset. So part of when we got back together, part of what I said is, I said, you need to do solo therapy. I'm not doing couples therapy again until you do solo therapy. We had gone to one more couples therapist, and he had so played her. And I still wonder was going on with her, because she sort of, when we met alone, she was sort of encouraging me to go to Al-Anon. She was encouraging me to not be so attached to him. But when we were together, she would really play into him. And she laughed when I started crying once. And so I walked out of the session. And then the next time I tried to explain to her why I had walked out, and, I started crying, telling her about her, laughing at me as I cried and rolling her eyes. And she did it again. And she looked at him and she said, "I'm starting to see the drama now." And I was I was livid. I just got up and walked out. So I'm never going to that lady. And I said, "You need to go to solo therapy. I'm going to go to Al-Anon because we can't afford 2 therapists. So you do that." And then he's like, "Well, you should go if I'm going to go." And, and I was like, "No, you literally," I said, "you don't understand. You tell me that me just sharing a feeling with you that I'm attacking you." I said, "So clearly there's something happening that you don't, it's not being interpreted the way it's being said." Because I was measuring, after so much therapy and after trying to salvage this, I was so measured about how I would approach him, right? Anger wasn't allowed. Nothing even remotely close to anger was allowed. So I would do that therapy speak, and I would be like, "Hey, I'm having this feeling, and I think it's because, when you don't tell me about X, Y, or Z, and then I find out later, that's really it." I mean, I literally would be talking like that, and know that I was calm, monotone. And he would storm out of the room and say I was attacking him, and he didn't need to be abused like that, and all of these things. And so he also meanwhile was going to AA, because I had told him I wanted him to go to Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous meetings, because I could tell, I was like, there's something about attention that you seem to need at a really unhealthy level from multiple people. And he was like, "No, I'm an alcoholic." And I was like, "Well, I don't think you're an alcoholic, but if you say that, you understand I will never believe you're not an alcoholic, right?" He's like, "Yes." So then when it came up in court papers, I was like, "You self-identified. I don't, so, you did this, dude." So he started seeing a solo therapist. He started seeing our therapist actually solo. That was the first step. Every other session was both of us, and then he would go the sessions in between. But then he stopped, and then we almost broke up. It was sort of always a cycle, and I would have to give it a deadline, because he would say we couldn't afford it, and he would say, he didn't have time because he wanted to be with his family. And I'm like, "Well, you're not going to have a family if you don't do this." And so when he was supposed to be getting a new solo therapist in 2019, and I don't even know what we were having some discussion, and then we hadn't talked about it for a couple hours. I got the kids to sleep, went in the room, and I remember I was just so uncomfortable, and I was about to cry. So I grabbed my empty cup, and I went to go walk into the kitchen to get some water. Because in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to move. If I have to cry, I'm going to do it in there, because if I cry in here, it's going to become a 7-day fight, and he's going to make me feel worse, and he's going to say mean things, and he's going to tell me that I'm unreasonable, and then not talk to me for a while. And as soon as I walked out of the room, I didn't say anything. I wasn't stomping, nothing. He just stormed up out of the bed, and he grabbed his work clothes for the next day, and he grabbed his keys, and he just started saying, "I don't need this bullshit. I don't need any of this shit. This is ridiculous. And I was like, what did I do? Like, what just happened? I'm just going to get water. And he's like, oh, you're upset about something again. And I just don't need this shit. And he took his house key off his ring and he set it on the counter. And he said, you told me if I leave again, I have to leave my key. And I said, yeah, that's right. You don't get to just walk out and come back in at will. Like, it's not fair to me. And it's certainly not fair to your child. Like, you can't do this. And I was like begging him not to go because I was just like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why this escalated. I don't know. This isn't how this has to be. And I said, can we just sleep in separate rooms and talk about this tomorrow? And he was just yelling at me. And then my daughter woke up and I picked her up and he just kept yelling at me. And I covered her ears and I screamed at him the word stop. And then he just looked at me and he looked so disgusted and he said, you just screamed with your child in your arms. And I said, but you were just yelling at us. Like, I covered her ears. And so he walked out and I still was trying to text him and ask him, you know, what's going on. About 12:30 at night, he said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to sleep in my car and find somewhere to live tomorrow. So the next day, you know, my daughter asked if Daddy was coming home. And I said, not to this house. Daddy's not going to live here anymore. Like, you know, she cried. It was about 3 days before Mother's Day and about a week before we were supposed to go on a trip to Cabo that I had bought for his 50th birthday present. He talked me into going to brunch with him and the kids on Mother's Day. And I remember I was just so devastated. And then looking back, I could see how he just kept poking at me. You know, at the time, I still wasn't everything for what it was. And I remember getting up. I couldn't eat. I got up and I went and threw up in the bathroom. And then he gave me grief for being dramatic and, you know, not being able to just enjoy a nice thing that he's doing for me. And then he went on the trip to Cabo. He still went on it. And he took spending money my dad had given him for his birthday. And like, I was just so crushed. I was like, I can't believe this is like, why did I give 2 more years to this? But when he got back from Cabo, he was, you know, he'd done a lot of thinking there and, you know, his family means a lot and he doesn't really want to throw it away and he really wants to make it work. And I was still very trauma bonded and like that physical, just that heavy physical pain of the loss. And so I said, well, we can try, but you can't move in. And we have to have a set schedule of when you take our daughter for time so that she knows when that's going to be. I said, you need to spend 2 nights a week having dinner with us here as a family so that connection still stays a little bit, but you know, we're going to live in different places and you're going to have to go back to solo therapy. And I said I was going to do that too, because I had gotten a promotion at work and I was like, okay, we can swing this and this is what we need. So of course I set that all in motion. He really bucked having like a set schedule because, you know, what if he's tired and what if this and what if that? And I was like, that's not how parenting is. Like, I don't come home and say I'm too tired to take care of her. Like, that's not how this goes. And in that time, that lasted only 4 months, that felt really like 4 years. You know, I started seeing a new therapist, and in that space, it became very clear that, you know, when you have to say these things out loud, that you can hear the ridiculousness of it. Of like, well, I just don't want to destroy her family. And it's like, well, her family's destroyed. Like, this isn't really a family. You know, and my therapist kept going, why are you holding on so tight? Why? And, you know, I said, I have to try everything so that when I look at my daughter later and say that I did everything I could to save her family, that I know that that's the truth. I know that that's what I did. And the part I didn't speak out loud for the first 2 months of therapy was I also was more than low level terrified what he was going to be like when I wasn't any good to him anymore. When I had to finally draw the line. And I didn't want to say that to myself because I didn't want to be the person who was scared to leave somebody, so they stayed with them. What that, meant about who I thought I was more devastating, I think, than anything else. So with my therapist sort of in slow motion and not calling it that until the last month, I was, creating an escape plan. And during that time, because of the not living together, I really was able to slowly chip away at that trauma bond. And I could see that when he wasn't there, the house was really calm, and that, there were normal toddler things. And, my daughter was 4. So there, it's not that it was quiet, but there was just a lack of tension in the air that felt so refreshing, because it had been 8 years of just being in tension all the time without even realizing how much. And then when he would come over for his dinner nights, the weather would just change in the house, and he would just start complaining about things. And of course, the entirety of our relationship, I was critical. I always complained. You can't ever be happy. Nothing is right for you, and you just have to find the negative. You're so negative and you're so angry. And having that space without him and then having him re-enter it for short periods, I was like, wow, that's you. Like, that's you. And he would come in and he would complain immediately about the dogs, or he'd complain immediately that it was hot. Can I turn a fan on? And, it was like just always this like small list of like grievances. And he would, maybe not show up because he was tired, or like one night he was supposed to take our daughter. And I said, hey, are you going to be here soon? And he said, oh, I'm tired and hungry. I just went home. And I'm like, so you're not going to see her and you're going to be gone for work the next 2 days? And he's like, yeah. And so I could see that like his priorities clearly weren't what I had kept wanting them to be and kept trying to pretend they were. And I could see that he was the issue. I knew that deep down. I knew that it wasn't me. I had even in the middle of the worst part of all the figuring everything out and all the lies, he kept telling me how angry I was. I had even emailed my ex, the one I'd been with for 13 years, and said, you've seen me through the best of times and the hardest of times. Like, I need your honest answer. Would you say I'm an angry person? And she was like, no. Like, and she said, you could be critical of this, or you could, she gave a list of things that I was like, yeah, those, okay, yep. Okay, those things, but not angry. At the same time, he started, because he would always have some kind of obsession with some number of females online or something. And at this point, one of them was a 23-year-old bikini barista in our like sort of larger geographic area. And I was so disgusted by it, because I was like, you're this 50-year-old man that she wouldn't want to have anything to do with. You're supposed to be working on your family. Supposedly you don't have an issue with, needing all this attention, but, you have to keep commenting on her posts, and I'm sure you're going to get coffee there, or, I'm like, and it just seemed so pathetic to me that I think that was the final straw where it broke the trauma bond. And I started to be repulsed. And so one night, I had given him a key a couple weeks before, maybe a month before, because I was volunteering at an overnight fundraiser and needed him to stay with our daughter. Well, he ended up taking her to his house and leaving the animals all alone anyway. And we had a fight about that. And I was, so unreasonable. And all he did was go to his aunt's house or his sister's house. And, but he didn't give me the key back. And I remember having this like anxiety about that. Because then instead of knocking or instead of me needing to leave a door open for him, he would just come in the front door like when he lived there. And I was already starting to just like say out loud that I needed an exit plan, and I needed to have it be rock solid so that there was less chaos. And I remember the night, like I had seen him, some message came up that looked like it was from her. And I was like, are you so pathetic? You're being catfished by a 23-year-old barista and you don't even think that's what it is. Like, it was just this like surreal, like, I can't believe this is the person I like tied myself to for so long. And so I waited till he was snoring. And then I remember really quietly grabbing his key ring and going in the bathroom and taking my key off of it and putting his key ring back. And then I think it was a week or two later that I said something to him about the barista. I had told him for a whole weekend that I needed space and that I needed to not have him message me or anything because I was trying to wrap my head around it. And then Sunday he messaged and said, I went to so-and-so's kid's birthday party and I missed you guys so much, and my family is so important and I'm really going to focus on the family. And I just told him what I'd been feeling about him doing this and that it looked like they'd been messaging, and I just couldn't do that anymore. And then he just flipped and started accusing me of like doing all this weird stuff through his Instagram. And he was doing this thing where he kept saying, it was just in text, but he was like, you have 24 hours to admit this. And if you admit it, I'll still love you. But if you don't admit it, then we're over. Like 5 p.m. tomorrow, we're over if you can't admit it. And I just said, I'll just save you the time. Like, we're just done. And then he just railed. Like, it was just like a switch flipped. And he told me I had achieved mega cunt status, and he was going to get 50% custody, and I wasn't going to be able to keep him from doing whatever he wanted. And I just said, you don't call me, don't text me. You have my email. Like, you just do that. But that is when, that's when I just built such a wall, and I'm so grateful that I was able to have that time. There was a lot of time I felt bad for trying again after he had walked out, but I think that it was so crucial to me being able to end it and keep my faculties about me so that I could say, yeah, everything's in writing. I know this is what I have to do. I don't miss you. I don't want you. I don't, I just have to focus on this child. So that's when, like, it was just a 180. Like, I was no good to him anymore. And so I asked him, I gave him a deadline for picking up stuff he'd left in the building for 6 months now that I had moved out to the garage. And he posted online that his landlord was keeping him from his things and stole his key. And could anybody help him get his barbecue? He can see it, but he's not allowed on the property. And a tenant's rights lawyer met with him pro bono and was like emailing me. And I was like, dude, this guy's lying. But it was just that level of harassment where it was like, he refused to show up. I had a name change court date because one of my daughter's middle names I figured out had come from conversations with the woman he had an affair with, and I wanted that name off her birth certificate. And he was like, I'm not doing that for you anymore. And he filed three false harassment claims against me at work. He was refusing to, we were in that pre-court order time. He was refusing to confirm drop-off time I had set a schedule that was like staggering up so that my daughter had a transition into spending more time away from home. And so he wouldn't have visitations for whole days because he would only confirm pickup time. But I had a suspicion, which was later confirmed, that he had kidnapped his son around the same age during the divorce proceeding with his wife. And he did that. It was 2 or 3 weeks he kept the child away from her. And so he was calling the police on me. He was leaving notes on the front door, bringing his son and saying, look, she told me they'd be here and they're not here. He was leaving notes on my front door. I live in a business district that were like 3 paper towels with Sharpie written on them and like red duct tape on my door. Like, so they were giant so that you could read them from across the street, saying that I, didn't have his daughter there and daddy misses you. The same guy who will chant like all cops are bastards with his punk rock friends was like going to the police department to report me or calling the police to my house. And, because I didn't answer my phone. It was just, at that point that I was like, okay, this isn't normal. Like, this isn't just like somebody who's like heartbroken. Like, what is this? And that's when I first started, learning about emotional abuse in that way. I think, I definitely had that stereotype that certainly a lot of us who grew up in the 80s have of like the sort of loud, drunk, physical abuser, but not this like covert, chameleon kind of manipulative thing. And so it took a long time, like even with my therapist, like I would call it the A word at first instead of abuse. Like I just couldn't say it. And it was like, I'm not someone who was abused, right? Like, how do I weave that into my own perception of myself? And how do I come to understand that, like, I stayed with someone and kept going back to someone who, was doing all of this stuff and who now I can clearly see is just cruel. Like, he's just mean, like, and has no qualms about, hurting his child in order to hurt me. Like, so I just have to figure out how to protect myself and protect this child who, definitely doesn't deserve what you put your son through, definitely doesn't deserve what you're gearing up to really unleash on her.
So how did things work at work?
So yeah, he was still working with me, which was tricky. Then he was filing these harassment claims. And it's interesting because it's a family business. So we had to have an outside company do the investigation, right? Like my uncle's HR and my dad owns the company. Like we can't. And that woman, she asked another manager, I had to really sort of keep separate. I just tried really hard to stay away, to keep really clear lines so that I didn't jeopardize the company. But after she talked to him and he gave her all his complaints about what I was doing and singling him out and harassing him at work. And she asked another manager, she goes, see, is this guy a drunk? Like, what is up with him? And I was like, yeah, see, you think sounds so sane to people, but when you really start ranting, well, because she hears all kinds of stuff, but, that came back as not founded. And then he tried a couple more times. And the third time he actually got reprimanded because he'd basically gone to a manager with personal emails between us and had complained about those. And so, he was clearly bringing personal stuff to work. And he ended up being laid off in the beginning of COVID. And in that time, we had 2 court dates, had what I thought was our, final court order, which is funny because, anybody who's been through family court, at least here in the States, like there is no such thing as a final custody court order because it's basically up for change at any point. But we had our first hearing in December, and it was really rough. He submitted a lot of not nice and not true things in his declaration, but the court did adopt basically what I had set as a schedule. And I think, again, that's where that summer where we were trying to make it work, I had sort of inadvertently set a status quo. So he ended up with what was basically 11 or 12% custody because I mimicked what he actually spent with her even when we were together. And I held off overnights. So I said, I don't think she's ready. And she had a 9-hour visit with him early on, and she would not leave my side or let me let go of her hand for 3 days. Like, it was really intense for her. And so then overnight started the week before COVID lockdowns. And then COVID happened. And, he had been harassing the whole time with the notes and the police and, doing all of that. But I thought, when I have this court order, now I have this. And one of the officers, it's really interesting, the first officer he had call me, I had gone away from the house knowing he might show up, and then he'd gone to the police department. And I remember I was in a Home Depot parking lot to buy a Christmas tree. And the police called me, and I said, that's not what's going on. Here's what's going on. All I'm asking him to do is confirm drop off. We have about 70 emails this week, and he just keeps refusing. I said, I would have been happy to give her, but I don't have any grounds to get her back if I don't have something in writing. And he goes, can I give you a piece of advice? And I said, yeah. I was like, please throw me anything, because I'm drowning here. And he said, when you get a court order, don't bend for this guy at all. Don't bend for him. He goes, you will undermine what that court order means, and this guy will push. So you need to not do that. And I am thankful to that officer to this day, because there are so many people in the police force, in family court, who really minimize how important it is with somebody who is abusive, with somebody who, I believe he's a sociopath. With someone who doesn't have a moral compass and doesn't have a conscience about any of this, that like, you can't bend, like, you just end up then back in that cycle. You have to just keep such firm boundaries. And so I was doing that, but then COVID happened. He got laid off, which was a blessing. But like, I hid out at home that day because I had no idea what he would do, because no matter the truth, like, I only found out because I had to prepare the checks. I didn't know he was on the chopping block. I didn't know any of that. I was so removed from his employment, but I was terrified. I had an iPad in my window ready to record in case I needed to call the police with my phone. Like, I was like, I don't know what this guy's going to do. And seemingly it went pretty smoothly. But what happened is 3 days later, well, he sent a really, sweet message, because, they'll send like these scathing attacks and then these like really sweet message in between, asking if he could just watch her while I work, because, he's unemployed now, so he could watch her. And, it won't be instead of his weekends. So basically I was going to end up having her for like 5 waking hours a week, if that's what happened. Like, it was funny. I was like, you're not even trading. I was like, how are you going to find a job? Like, but I said I was going to follow the court order as written, which was one of my pat answers, right? Because I'm like, no, my daughter is like starting to freak out about these overnights. I can't send her to you more. Like, this isn't good for her. So 3 days later, I got notice that he'd filed an ex parte emergency petition against me for neglect, because I had started to bring my daughter to work with me during COVID, because she had I'd hired private nannies for 3 days a week when schools closed down, because I had to work. And so I was taking her, I think I was doing 5 days at first. The first 2, they both quit, because as soon as overnight started, my daughter started having rage fits. Like, she would just have these episodes when she was home where she was just inconsolable, kicking, screaming, like, just all the emotions were coming out in that way. And so 2 people quit. And so I started bringing her to work, and he filed a neglect charge against me. That was 2 hearings over like 4 months. He did not win that one. And in hindsight, I think that my case was really helped by him filing that, because family court see true, like, terrible neglect, right? So for him to say, and then I could show pictures of my private office and her working on her alphabet and watching Netflix with her stuffed animals, like, on the couch. It's not neglect. So I think at that point, some things turned for me in the eyes of the family court, because it was clear that there was one person acting nefariously and one person really trying to take care of a child. So those hearings ended. He ended up with like a vacation clause was the only thing he won. And then I ended up with medical and educational decision making, because he showed himself to not be capable of being either cooperative or putting her first. And so that felt like a win. I was like, okay, well, that was an expensive win, but at least I got through this. And, you know, every week there was something where he was messing with her head. He was telling her I was lying about certain things. Like one time she came home and said, Daddy said you have gray hair and you dye it and you lie to me about it. And it was, you know, 6 months into COVID. So I actually have dyed my hair most of my adult life. But I said, well, I don't lie about it. I dye my hair. I said, but you can see right here, like I have a little bit of gray, you know. And she just freaked out, and just like, it was one of those moments where I just saw cognitive dissonance, like at work, because she either had to believe him and I'm a liar, or she has to believe me and then he's a liar who's lying about me. Right. And she just couldn't. She just walked out of the room. She said, can we not talk about it? And I was like, yes, we cannot talk about it. He sent an iPod home in her underwear one day. She would come home with these like weird bruises and scratches. Like, you know, I don't think he was laying hands on her, but it was like his room was a mess, and she would trip over, like she'd say she hit something metal in his room and weird stuff like that. He had her the night of her preschool graduation, and he knew about it, and I got her ready for it and was going to go there. And I went there and he never showed up, but he lied and told her that it was later in the night and that I was going to take her, so that when she got dropped off, I had to tell her she'd missed it. She just collapsed to the ground and cried, and he just smirked at his car, because, you know, that was just going to crush me, that, you know, he wanted to make her mad at me. He would just do stuff like that all the time. You know, we had a COVID exposure. And so when I messaged him, and then his response was to attack me over not telling him faster, you know, all that stuff where it's like, clearly you're not concerned about your daughter. We actually had COVID at one point. So I had messaged him and I was panicked about how he was going to react. And we switched weekends. And then because I didn't answer my phone, he pounded on our door for 30 minutes, and I asked him to leave, or I'd call the police. So he called the police, and it was this whole ordeal where they were trying to get me to just like let her go see him. And I'm like, this isn't what you think. Like, none of this is what you think. Like, because he did that raging at my door for 30 minutes and then stepped back and just was calm, you know, and was just the like worried father. And she's just, I don't know why she's keeping her from me. 3 officers, I had to talk to 3 officers in my backyard about that for like an hour. And then a couple years out, he was late for a pickup, and I had a 30-minute clause, and I bailed, because once it was 31 minutes, I knew if he showed up then he was going to make a scene. And he pulled up as I was pulling out, and he chased us through 2 towns, was trying to get me, like, run us off the road. And he would get me over to the curb, and then he would get out of the car like he was going to grab her out of the car. And then as soon as he'd get out of the car, I'd go again. And I was on the phone with the police, and I would honk as soon as he got out of his car so that anybody in the area would like be looking at us. My daughter's screaming. He's trying to get her to walk across like 3 lanes of traffic to go to his car. At a red light, he got next to us, and he punched the car twice on the side she was on, and called me a fucking bitch. And, you know, she's screaming. And then I finally flagged down a police officer, followed him, and was flashing my lights. And so they pulled over. And so then he got in line behind me and was all like, calm again. And I was like, here we go. Here's, you know, sad dad. And, you know, the police let us go somewhere because he was trying to just stare at us while he was getting talked to. And then he tried to still talk to us as they were making him leave. And an officer stood between us, and then they followed us mostly home. But from that incident, I filed another petition with the court because I was like, I don't know what to do, because when he came to the door, it was only a month earlier, he'd been pounding on the door, and the police had been so dismissive of it. I had told the officers, I said, I think he's going to escalate because you guys are acting like he didn't do anything wrong. And then he escalated, and I said, I can't do nothing. Like, this is terrifying. Like, my child is terrified, and I was terrified. And I kept having, through those years, I kept having to face that there'd be things that happen in custody disputes, quote unquote, where you're like, well, he wouldn't do that. And then you have to go, well, I don't know if he wouldn't do that because he's done these 42 other things that I never thought he would have done. And he's done those things. So in that filing, I actually ended up with sole legal and physical custody. His ex-wife gave a declaration for me, outlining that he did all the same things to her when they split, so that he could no longer keep saying that he co-parents fine with her and the problem is me. He was put on supervised visitation in order to do 52 weeks of anger management, in addition to like a parenting and a co-parenting class. And he has yet to do any of that. So we haven't had visitation in just over 2 years now, which, is a relief, but it's one of those things that is such a sad thing to have to need, to have to protect your child from another parent. It was a win in court, but it's one of those wins that you wish you never, ever needed. She understands, like, she'll bring up every once in a while, like, remember when daddy did this to the car, and she'll, fake punch, or she'll be like, remember when daddy used to always call you a liar, or, remember when daddy didn't take me to graduation, and she'll be like, I'm still mad about that. But she also misses daddy. And, we have a plan. She asked me, I want to say maybe 6 months ago, like, what would happen if we ran into him? And I said, well, it would be up to you. Like, if you want to say hi to daddy, you could say hi to daddy, but you can't go with him. You know why you can't go with him, right? She's like, yeah. But then when we brought it up with her therapist, it turned out she was also just afraid she wouldn't want to talk to him and she wouldn't know what to do. So we have a safe word now, where if we did run into him in our town, if she said that, I would know that meant she didn't want to talk to daddy. And then I would, be the bad guy and just kind of steer her away from the situation. So, we're luckier than a lot of parents because we have some real protections in place. And the judge actually even put parameters for what he'd have to do to even try to file again. But it's a bitter pill to have this kind of parentage when it's not what you wanted.
And how's your healing process going?
That has been, a lot more than I expected. I think that there was a part of me in the beginning that was like, okay, the biggest issue is reconciling how I stayed in this so long and figuring out how to trust again, myself and other people. But through the process, I'm seeing so much from my childhood differently now than I used to. And sort of recognizing patterns and things that seemed normal to me that in the light of, post-abuse, as well as, in parenting and remembering things that were said or done and not being able to imagine saying or doing those things to my child. Like, I would have never said, oh, I had an abusive childhood or I had a terrible childhood. And I still don't think I had a terrible childhood. I think that my parents loved me. I think that neither of them were sociopaths or, abusive in that way. But, there's definitely sort of elements of neglect or of minimizing and gaslighting and, of being told you're too sensitive or too dramatic and, having all of those feelings dismissed that that create an environment where you tolerate someone else doing that for a lot longer than if, that wasn't a part of how your whole family sort of spoke about you or did things. So, I am almost 4 years out now. And at this point, I am really happy being single. And I'm not closed off to the idea, but I really, I don't need it at this point. And I know that, when I meet somebody, it's going to bring up all kinds of other issues, trying to trust someone again, that will mean some more really deep healing. But, I started writing around the time Overnight started. I started an anonymous blog, and it was to get through the post-separation abuse because it's such madness and nobody understands it. And you can't possibly explain it to people in the way that it happens because it's such, the 1,000 cuts and it's so many small things. And so writing has been really important to my healing. And I'm working on a memoir project that right now its goal is to just really make sense of how it feels to be in that, to sort of know it's not okay, but how disorienting and sort of paralyzed you feel in the middle of all of that. So that's been, I am finally healed enough that I'm going back and able to sit in moments of being with him, the important moments from that. So that's been really helpful. So I think, finishing that project will be good.
And if you had any words of wisdom for everyone listening, what would they be?
Oh my gosh. So I think, one of the things that I hope to teach my daughter, and that I think is such an important message that I certainly didn't get from culture, media, my family, whatever, is that idea of that sort of fairy tale love, that rapid connection, that chemistry in that way, right? That a lot of folks now will talk about what we call chemistry in romantic relationships as really just being like an activation of some sort of anxiety about a past way we were treated or some sort of dynamic like that. But I think if I had slowed down, if I had not bought into that soulmate kind of connection, if I had not also been so geared towards, when kind of thing, that I wouldn't have been a good target for him, because he would have lost interest. And I think just really not projecting your own morals, ethics, intentions on other people, because it took a long time. It took until after I ended it for me to be able to accept that he would do these things just to hurt us. That just seemed so unfathomable to me, because I would never do that intentionally. So I think, taking it slow, letting someone show themselves before you invest too much. The words matching actions is so important. But I think that there is so much about how we behave in these relationships that we feel shame for, that we keep ourselves in them because we're so afraid of exposing that, of being embarrassed, of admitting or having to admit to the ways that we behaved unlike how we see ourselves, that, I really try to stress with people that to just let go of that shame. Like, who we were in that is not who we are. Like that we were being poked at constantly. And, that of course we are going to act out just like a cornered animal. So, to just let go of that shame and accept that what you did is what you did to survive.
Well, Avery, we are done. And you did a really good job today. And you just did a really good job conveying your story and really letting people share a big part of your life and your pain. And hopefully, and I know there's going to be someone out there who's going to learn from what you said today, be validated, and maneuver themselves out of a relationship because of you. So I can't thank you enough for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for giving so many people voices in this.
So thank you so much, Avery, for being here with us today. And if you want to be a guest like Avery was today, please do go to narcissistapocalypse.com. Top of the page, there's a button that says guest form. When you click on that button, it takes you to our guest form page. There you can read all of our instructions and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button. And please do send it in the format that we ask for. And if you are in need of support, we have a support group at narcissistapocalypse.com. Top of the page, you'll see a support group button. When you click on that button, it takes you to our very own safe social network. Inside, you'll see that we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. We also have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation that you need from survivors just like you, and you can do the exact same thing for them. It is a wonderful group of people on there, and you can share your experiences and make friends as well. So if you need support, join our support group today. And if you need even more support, please do visit our friends at DomesticShelters.org. At DomesticShelters.org, they have articles and resources to help you make sense of what you are dealing with. They have every phone number, email address, and web address for shelters and agencies, no matter how big or small the town you are in. DomesticShelters.org has it there. It is a wonderful free resource and a wonderful organization. So if you need extra support, please do go to DomesticShelters.org. And we here at Narcissist Apocalypse have a new friend to the show, and it is an organization called Shelter Movers, which you can reach at sheltermovers.com. And Shelter Movers helps survivors of domestic violence transition to a better and safer life. They are currently a Canadian company, but looking to be spreading into the United States. It's a volunteer organization and a donor-supported charitable organization as well. And what they do is they help coordinate moves for those who are getting out of domestic violence. They do the move with you, and then they also put things into storage for you. All of your belongings can go into storage, and they do this for your pets and livestock as well. They find homes for them, and it's just a wonderful organization. So if you need help from them or just want to donate to them, please go to sheltermovers.com and check them out. And that is it for our show today. So for myself and Avery, we hope you have a good night.